The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Russell Westbrook, ladies and gentlemen. That's how we're opening our show today, because we had all the plans in the world to just cruise into a nice, easy morning of talking about the Indiana Pacers, and that's all going down the tubes quickly. We will get to that on this show, by the way. For those of you our rabid fans out in the Indiana area, we will get to the Pacers. But this is Fantasy NBA Today. I am Dan Besbris, and he, who you will hear shortly, is Vince Miracle. And the NBA has a way of throwing some stories at you when you least expect it. I did not think anybody was going to be signing an earth-shattering deal in the last couple of days, but Vince, here we are.
We are here. That was not the intro I was expecting or hoping for, but guess what? It happened.
To those, by the way, listening, Vince has been trying to convince me to do an intro in some impressionist voices. I am not that good at them, but apparently good enough to make Vince laugh. So one day, don't be surprised if you hear some weird voice introduce the show, but it's not today. I'm playing it cool, Daddy-O. So that I'm breaking Vince before we can get this thing rolling. Russell Westbrook, Vince, changed his contract terms for this year and extended it by 2 seasons for revenge.
Revenge? I think it just was a smart business move.
You think?
Honestly, what was that?
You think?
Oh yeah, no, he's making a ton of money. Player option in the 3rd year, and well, now look for him to be a fantasy monster. Hopefully, racking up triple doubles.
So we talked about it a little bit before when we previewed Oklahoma City after the Kevin Durant departure, and we left the door a little bit open with this team because you and I were both kind of expecting there to be a whole bunch of Westbrook drama and for it to drag on, and for the Thunder, to be gauging interest on teams like the Celtics, the Lakers, seeing if they could pry massive packages of young players out of these teams, which would have completely destroyed the dynamic in Oklahoma City, but it would have made a monster out of a guy named Victor Oladipo. But now we have a little bit more consistency with Westbrook signing this deal and being a Thunder through, well, what is it right now? 2019, I think, is the end of that deal. He and James Harden, to me, Vince, are your 1 and 2 guys.
Oh yeah, without a doubt, they're going to be having the ball in their hand for as much as they can, and as much as the team will let them shoot the basketball as much as they want. I mean, they're going to be fantasy monsters, both of them, and it's going to be between the two on who you're picking with that number 1 pick for sure. Because a guy like Harden, unlike Westbrook, he'll knock down. There's no way he can't average 30 points and 3-pointers with the same exact stats that he trickled down with last season, going into this new year under D'Antoni, and then with Westbrook, we've seen what he can do without Kevin Durant.
Yeah,
we've seen the stats he can bring up.
It's crazy,
just amazing.
It's completely bonkers. The guy was setting individual marks that no one in the league can touch, and he's angry because by all accounts, at least the reports that I've been reading, Vince, he was sort of, at least he was intimated, if not completely told by Kevin Durant that he was sticking around. And so Westbrook, feeling a tad slighted, he signs this deal. He wants to build with Oklahoma City. This is colossal. But what does it do to the guys around him? Are we now able to get a better idea of what to expect from someone like an Oladipo, from someone like an Enes Kanter, Steven Adams? Do they become a little bit more, I don't want to say reliable, but I think you can start to position them in a fantasy draft now?
Oh, yeah, I think whatever you guys were expecting from them now that Kevin Durant left, and when we did that podcast after the Kevin Durant news, I think they stand pat, and I think now you know exactly where you need to go get them, like a guy like Victor Oladipo, who I think he has the potential to be a top 30 player next season. this upcoming year, just because of the fact that he's the number 2 guy now. I don't think it's Enes Kanter. I don't think it's Steven Adams. I think it's going to be Victor Oladipo, and rightfully so. The guy is smooth. That's why I talked about it on the show that we did with Kevin Durant leaving. He's one of the smoothest players on the court, the way he plays. And I think he'll play off the ball of Westbrook very well. Both of them like to have the ball in their hands, so that's going to kind of be an issue. But I think they're both scorers and they both can score the basketball. And I think they're going to be a nice little tandem in that backcourt. I'm very excited to see how those two play off of each other. And, I think they're going to swap point guard duties because is Russell Westbrook a point guard? I guess so. That's the position they're going to label him. But Victor Oladipo is almost that next level tier down from what Westbrook is as a player, which is that point shooting guard type player. So I'm very excited to see him. Steven Adams, I think we saw what he could be in the postseason with the blocks, the rebounds. He just needs to work on that scoring a little bit more. You kind of have to hope he can get to around 13 to 15 points with the 8 to 10 rebounds. And then Enes Kanter, can he just be consistent? Because if he's consistent, he's a guy who can, again, bring down a double-double, knock down a corner three every once in a while, get you decent percentages from the field and from the free throw line if he just stays consistent. So I think you know what to expect from a lot of these guys, and just a person that I have off the top of my list who I think could be a top 30 player is Victor Oladipo. As of right now, ESPN ranks him at number 22. So even maybe he can even exceed that and go top 20 player. We'll see what happens, but I have Westbrook and Oladipo definitely on my draft sheet.
Yeah, Kanter was one of those really weird cases, and Aaron Bruschi talked about it a whole bunch towards the end of the regular season on this show, where he was a guy who was like a top 200 value by average, but by totals last year, he was a top 70 value. And that's just a guy that plays every night consistently, decent percentages. He ended up as the number 61 ranked player by totals. I mean, that's an insane split between average and total based on durability. But, of course, for Kanter, the one thing that he will not get you almost ever is a defensive stat. He was brutal in those departments last year. He averaged 0.3 steals and 0.4 blocks in 21 minutes a ball game. So those are not coming up, even if you extrapolate and draw his minutes out by another 6 or 7 a ball game. But points and rebounds, durability, good percentages. He's a guy that is certainly worth taking a look at towards the tail end of a fantasy draft. And then Oladipo, Vince, I'm 100% in the same camp as you. I know you and I have disagreed, actually, on a number of players over the last few weeks as we've kind of toured the NBA, but he's not one of them. And this is something that I've done a few times lately on this show, is I'm going to reveal some numbers to listeners that maybe they kind of forgot about. Because with a guy like Oladipo, it was really easy last year to get caught up in the Scott Skiles day-to-day yanking around minutia, where you felt like just because of inconsistency and because of minutes, maybe you weren't really getting that great of a value. But at the end of the year, Oladipo, by average, mind you, this is 9-cat roto numbers I'm quoting here, by average, actually outperformed his preseason number. He was ranked in the preseason last year as number 34. He finished the season as number 30. 16 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.6 steals, 0.8 blocks, mind you, from Oladipo. Let's not forget about that. And 83% at the foul line, 44% from the field, which is not going to help you much, but it won't knock you off your pedestal as much as some other guys that may be a higher volume situation. So, the totals numbers for Oladipo does drop him down by about 10 spots from 30 to 40 overall. But without somebody yanking him around this year, playing alongside a true superstar in Russell Westbrook, Oladipo should easily, in my opinion, be a top 30 value this coming season. I don't think that there's any question about that.
I mean, there's some people that think that he's just going to be a slasher and not really a trustworthy shooter in the catch and shoot situations. But again, Russell Westbrook is going to feed for those assists. He's going to keep searching. He wants triple doubles. I mean, you can say that's not what he's looking for. He's a guy who's so scrappy and just wants to win. He's a stat chaser. I'm not gonna lie. You watch him; he's looking for certain stats. I mean, I remember there was a game just this past season. I think he was chasing the triple double record, and they went back. He went back in the game when they were already up by 12 points with 3 minutes left just to get 2 more rebounds. So I mean, he's a stat chaser. So if he sees Victor Oladipo driving, he's gonna find him the basketball. If he sees him on the mid-range shot, he's gonna find him the basketball. Victor Oladipo is gonna have as many shots as he can handle with after Russell Westbrook gets his turn. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because you and I are talking about how the big guys are going to get involved on this team. Kevin Durant is gone. Let's not forget that's a ton of offensive looks that are going to get split up, and they're not all going to Russell Westbrook. So, I mean, you're talking about a guy. Go ahead.
8.2 points per game are now gone from last season. So where is that going to come from?
It's a whopper. I mean, it is a whale. That is bigger than a marlin, and Oladipo is going to be getting a big chunk of that. I watched a lot of Victor Oladipo as I tried to figure out the Magic last year on a day-to-day basis, and it was hard. But I'll tell you one thing: he is an incredible defender when he wants to be. I don't know if I've ever seen a guy when he's that laser-focused play one-on-one basketball and defend passing lanes. He's very, very good. I think underrated because the Magic were not good, and he's going to be an outstanding fit. He's going to be an outstanding fantasy asset, and he's a guy that I would think about actually considering reaching by 5 spots or so to try to get him. Vince, now I think we can talk about the Pacers. Is that okay? Can we move ahead and finally get to the team that we've been postponing for 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, we almost postponed it today because of this breaking news, and we just couldn't do it to you guys in Indiana. We got you.
The good people of Indianapolis, we're coming for you right now. The Indiana Pacers, Vince, I think the best way to look at this team is just to go position by position, because this is a club now that is very heavy, to me at least, in starters' minutes. They have a decent bench, but I don't think the bench is going to be playing big minutes, with the possible exception of around the shooting guard spot. So let's start at the point guard position. They traded for Jeff Teague. They signed Aaron Brooks, and they still have Rodney Stuckey, although I would call him a 2. This, to me, feels like Teague is going to be seeing actually a relatively similar number of minutes to what he was looking at in Atlanta this last year, which was about 29 or so. And he underperformed. There's no way around it. He was he was expected at least to be a top 50 guy last season, and he ended up as a top 70 guy, and that's a disappointment. He wasn't horrible, but he wasn't great. And to me, what you got from him last year, which is that slight drop-off, I think that's actually more like what you're going to see this year, as opposed to the expectations from Teague last season, which was higher. So my take is top 70. That's where I would consider looking at Teague. I think he's going to be pretty reliable, but I don't think he's going to be spectacular. That's where I sit on Jeff Teague.
I kind of agree with you. You say top 70. I say he's going to be like just under that 70, like 75. So maybe top 80 player. I'm just one tier down. I mean, he does stay healthy. 79 games last season, 73 the season before, 79 the year after that. Before that, it's just I don't see anything in his role that has changed. The 15.7 points, the 5.9 assists. Maybe he gets you 7 assists now, but we can't forget that Monte Ellis is going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit as well. I mean, he initiates the offense quite a bit as well. So that's where I have my little bit of worries about Jeff Teague. I'm not expecting too much from him, and I don't think anybody else should either. I think, again, top 75 player.
Yeah, I think maybe the points peel off by 1 or 2, but you might see a slight increase in assists, in efficiency, maybe more than anything else, and I think you probably see the turnovers come down a tiny bit as well. So we're close on that one, but not in exact agreement. Small forward's an easy one, Vince. We'll come back to shooting guard because that's an interesting spot for me. Paul George, he's gonna play the whole game unless somebody yanks him out, and I see no reason to really knock him down at all. I mean, he was a top 20 guy last year. He should be a top 20 guy this coming year, yeah?
I'm projected in the first round.
Yeah, so there's no real drop-off with Paul George. He's a guy that can do everything. He's elite in steals. I would like to see his shooting percentage improve. Do Is there any hope of him coming up from 42%, or is that just kind of what you're going to get with a guy that bombs away from downtown?
No, I think they added a little bit more help, and that's what they needed, because in that previous team last season, who was there? It was him, Miles Turner, C.J. Miles, who's just a chucker and still just a chucker. Ty Lawson. Ugh. I mean, they didn't really have much, and so they needed him to shoot as much as they could. And even when the season kind of came down to the latter half of the season, you know, he was even saying like, the team's on my back. I'm carrying it. He has to shoot the basketball as much as he can. So I think now with the help of Jeff Teague, I think Monte Ellis is still going to be a factor. Miles Turner is going to become a starter. We're going to get to him in a few minutes. Same with Al Jefferson, who's going to be there. And Thad Young. I think now he has a little bit more depth, a little bit more help to help with the offensive load, who are other threats on the court. And maybe that helps with his field goal percentage to where maybe instead of, what was it last season? Just above 40, right?
41.8.
Yeah, just above 40. Maybe it goes to 44, 45%.
Well, that makes him a first rounder.
Great, but it's pretty good. Yeah.
That adjustment on its own would move him from the second round to the first round without question, because the only thing that was holding him back last year was the fact that his field goal percentage was inefficient and turnovers a little bit high, but you can take that from a someone who gives you the type of numbers he did in other categories. So if he can get the field goal percentage up by 1 or 2%, that's I mean, he becomes truly an elite player, and he becomes a first rounder. So that's the coin flip. If you believe he can, for sure. If you believe he can't, then certainly still a second rounder. But you can't really go wrong with him. Thad Young is a big question mark, Vince, because he had inordinate freedom last year in Brooklyn. He was a stud. By totals, he was the 41st ranked player in fantasy. He's not going to have that this year. There aren't enough touches for him to be that relevant, and there are other big men on this Pacers team that are going to be sort of floating in and out of the power forward and center spot. So the question really, to me, with Thad Young isn't whether or not there will be a drop-off. The question is how much. Last year, he was drafted generally 8th, 9th round, somewhere in that neck of the woods, and he was a huge steal. I think you could actually consider taking him 8th, 9th rounds this year and expect 8th or 9th round value. Where do you stand with that?
Oh, Thad Young definitely going to take a drop off this year. I was talking with AB this morning. He's working on the B150 that you guys should be very excited for.
I am,
but because I've had such a problem with this team, and this is the reason why we dedicated a full episode to this team, because I don't know how to project this team, and so I had to go to someone I trust and someone who honestly is working on his numbers right now just as much as I am. And I said, "What are your thoughts on Thad Young?" He's like, "Oh, he's going to take a drop off," and this is the conclusion that we came to is. He's a guy whose value is completely predicated on the rebounding and on the defensive stats, the 1.5 steals, the 0.5 blocks, the 9 rebounds per game last season. Now he's on a team where the guards are decent rebounders, like Monte Ellis, the 3.3 last season. We're going to get to him. Paul George is going to be a decent rebounder. Miles Turner, now as a starter, averaged 5.5 rebounds last year. That should be going up in his second year, adding the muscle, adding the experience, and being that he's going to get starters minutes. Al Jefferson's there. His rebounding totals are going to come on a decline. So if you're not getting the rebounds and you're only getting 15 points per game, and honestly, that's going to come down because, again, Paul George is going to be taking more shots. Where are you seeing his value? Plus, he's not even that good of a free throw shooter at 64.4%. So where is his value? And that's where you're going to have a huge problem with a guy like Thad Young. Is it maybe you see a uptick in assists where he averaged 1.9? Hope maybe you can see that go to 3.
Yeah, but that's
even so.
Yeah, that's not worth it. I mean, he's that guy that like you said, his value is predicated on the fact that he is elite in steals for a forward, a guy that can give you power forward eligibility and big-time steals numbers. That's unique. His field goal percentage was a big key last year because he was shooting 51.5% on 13 field goals a game. That number's coming down. So even if he's shooting 52% next year, if he's only taking 9 or 10 shots, it's not going to have the same impact on your numbers. The free throw percent does hurt you, although he doesn't take that many, so I guess it's not that big of a deal. But everything's coming down. And again, I mean, 8th, 9th round, 10th round, something like that, I think you could still grab him and know that you're going to get a guy who will give you X numbers in those stats, probably peel off everything from last year by 20% or so. But he's not a guy that you should be targeting based on what he did last season. That would be a mistake with Young. I wouldn't, Vince, I wouldn't go as far as stamping him with someone else's headache marker, because I do think that his style of play does translate from team to team. He's just not going to be as involved.
Honestly, it would have been fine if he shot at least a decent free throw percentage, because he does fill out a stat sheet, and that's what I talk about a lot in the show. Is like, I want players that can help me in multiple different categories, and that's something that Thaddeus does. He's not going to explode in one category, but he can help you across the board. Unfortunately, what he's doing across the board is the 1.5 steals, which is good, the 0.5 blocks, which is good. But then if his shots are going down, I also think that his field goal percentage is going to go down. Because in Brooklyn, he got to take as many shots as he wanted, both mid-range and off of layups, and he got most of his points off the fast break. Again, I don't see that happening as much. And so then I'm looking at him like, okay, well, does he at least help me in both field goal departments? No, he doesn't. I think the 51% probably drops down to maybe 47%, which still isn't terrible. And then the free throws, 64%. Can that go up? I don't think so. And so my projection for him, these are just my numbers off the top of my head, I think he's going to do is right around 12 points, 6 rebounds, shooting 47% from the field, 0 3-pointers, and maybe 2 steals.
I think the field goal percentage probably just a hair higher, but I don't think the other numbers are all that far off. What do you see with the center position in Indiana? Al Jefferson, obviously on the decline. He's an older guy, but they're still going to utilize him, which is going to cut into Miles Turner's breakout that everybody might be talking about, the fact that, he's going to be starting, he's going to be playing 35 minutes a ball game. I don't think it's going to be that simple. I think you may see Miles Turner move from 23 minutes this last year to 28, which still makes him a guy worth owning, but I don't think he's going to be this, top 60, top 70 guys that you might hear some hype about.
No, I think Al Jefferson is going to get you 18 to 20 minutes. I don't think he's going to be really exceeding that. He's the veteran presence. I think that it's when they want to go big. They want to have a veteran out there like Al Jefferson who could kind of put his back to the basket and give this team a different look and have other teams scheming for them in a different way. I kind of disagree with you. I think Miles Turner is in for a break here. I think it was a 1.4 blocks last season is going to probably go up to 2. And I'm pretty confident that the fact that he can knock down a 3-pointer, get you decent percentages both from the field and from the free throw line. I think the point totals are going to, I'd say right around 15 points per game, which isn't crazy. And I think he's going to get you right around 8 to 10 rebounds. I'm really high on Miles Turner. I'm very excited to see what he can be as a second-year player.
Yeah, I'm not quite as high as you are on him. I think you're going to see some growing pains. He's a very unique talent. I mean, he's an interesting ball player, but I think that the 10 points doesn't go to 15. I think it goes to more like 12.5. I think the rebounds from 5.5 maybe up towards 7.5 or 8 instead of nearing the double-double. Blocks maybe from 1.4 to like 1.7 or 8, which does make him a top 100 value easily. But I'm not extending myself any further than that, and I think so it puts me in a weird spot because I'm breaking it down as a guy that maybe I'm not as excited about as you, but I don't want the listeners to think that I don't like Miles Turner. I think he's a very useful basketball player from a fantasy standpoint. I just think that in my drafts, when I get into these things and I put my head down, I think somebody else is going to snap him up earlier with the expectations, like you said, Vince. So I probably won't end up with him just because of the way the chips are going to fall. Not because I don't want him, but just because I'm not going to get him as early as I would have to have him.
Well, what round are you projecting him? Because the reason why I'm looking at his numbers and I'm so high on him is he averaged 10.3 points and 5.5 rebounds per game in just 22 minutes per game. He's going to be probably seeing 10 more minutes each game. I'm telling you, he's going to get right around 30 to 32 minutes a game, as much as he can handle.
I think that number is going to be about 3 minutes less, and I think that this team is so loaded, particularly now with a guy like Thad Young, that is another player on this club that's going to be getting his buckets kind of while the defense is in motion. That I just don't think that his not that his relevance, but I don't think that his interaction, I don't think it's going to bump the way that it would need to for him to be a feature guy on this team to jump all the way to 7th, 8th round. I'm a round or two back from that. That's where I sit.
We will see, sir. We will see.
that's half of the fun of this thing. All right, shooting guard spot. This one's a question mark. Monte Ellis is the starter, but Rodney Stuckey, CJ Miles could all slot in there. CJ generally sees more of his time at the small forward, but that's Paul George territory. He even played a little power forward last year, but they're not going to need him there anymore. So Monte Ellis is a fantasy player that I'm just not that excited about. Am I being too hard on him?
Yeah, because I thought I was being too hard on him, and I was completely turned around because this is a quote that I was told this morning. You ready for this?
Yeah, hit me.
Monte Ellis was awesome last season.
Awesome.
That was what I was told this morning, was that Monte Ellis was awesome. So I did my research. I looked into it. We went back and forth with the guy who I brought up earlier, Mr. AB. I mean, he finished in 9-cat at 51st. He was a top 50 player last year, 51. And in 8-cat leagues, he was ranked 39th when the season ended. And at 30 years old, yeah, maybe you see a slight decline. But Monte Ellis should be seeing right around those same numbers. Rodney Stuckey, he can never stay healthy. CJ Miles, he's a chugger. He can never stay healthy. I'm high on CJ Miles, though. I really like CJ Miles. I have said that before. But they just can't stay on the court. And so Monte Ellis, in the past 4 seasons, has never played less than 80 games. He's a guy who stays healthy. That's something that you want on your team. And the way that he can score, the fact that he averages 4.7 assists per game, does that go down a little bit now that Jeff Teague is there? Maybe. But at the same time, Jeff Teague, he's going to be kind of like the shooter. They're going to try and make him into a shooter still because Monte Ellis initiates the offense so well with that driving kick. And I don't see him having too much of a decline. I mean, of course, at age 30, you're going to see a slight decline. But, I mean, he was putting up 5th round value last year.
Yeah, that's kind of surprising because he had such an up and down season. But he is and always has been very good at playing passing lanes. He averaged 2 steals a game last year. 1.1 3-pointers, 14 points, 3 rebounds, close to 5 assists. I'd like to see the turnovers come down. I don't know that they ever will with him. And 42.7% field goals. He's not a great free throw shooter, which I think is a little bit odd given he's a guy that does slash and does get to the line a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I guess
3 times a game.
Yeah, that's not as many as I would have expected. But I mean, how do the changes in Indiana impact him? Do they impact him? I mean, to bring in another guy in the backcourt, to bring in Thad Young, the growth of Miles Turner, there has to be some kind of drop-off. No?
I don't think there's a big drop-off. I really don't. I mean, you look at how the roster was structured last season. You look at it this year. He took 12.6 shots last year. And he's arguably the second best scorer on this team.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And so he's still going to need to be able to score the basketball when Paul George is out. And I think there's going to be times where he's going to be initiating the guys off the bench. And then when they're going to have that relay there and that cycle, and he's going to get a ton of minutes. I still think he's going to get right around 34 minutes a game. And the big factor in here is that he plays through injury. He stays on the floor. Bring up that again. Over the last 4 seasons, he's never played less than 80 games. Last year, I believe CJ Miles played 30 or 64 games. Rodney Stuckey, did he even play? I forgot he was team. I mean, he's always injured. And so if you're going to need a guy who can again do the little things, and the 1.9 steals for back-to-back seasons, why can't he do that again? He's a pest in the passing lanes. Is he a little bit of a problem with that 42% from the field? Yeah, hopefully that goes up now that Jeff Teague may have the ball in his hand a little bit more. And hopefully that 30% from the 3-point range can go up to maybe 33, which didn't happen. It just happened 2 seasons prior. I mean, 13-14 season with Dallas. That's not terrible if he can shoot 33% from 3-point range and take maybe 3 a game and hit maybe 1 or 2. But even last season, he had, what, 1 a game?
Yeah.
2 a game?
1 a game.
I mean, maybe he can get that to 1.5, closer to 2. Who knows? I just don't think there's going to be a huge decline in Monte Ellis. And if you can get him in maybe the 6th round, that's where I'm targeting him.
Yeah, that I could get on board with 6th round, and if he slips to the 7th, then
that's a steal.
Yeah, then you grab him for sure. Okay, so that's the answer. I was in particular being a bit too hard on Monte Ellis. Somebody actually midway through the season last year proposed me a Monte Ellis trade. He did pick up steam later on as he began to kind of settle in a little bit more. So he's a guy that was actually trending up as the season went on, and I guess people should remember that going into this year, where there may be some growing pains early, but that's definitely not the time to bail out on him. That's the Indiana Pacers, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, there's the other guys are not really worth mentioning. Aaron Brooks, not relevant. Lavoy Allen, not relevant.
Jeff Teague goes down, relevant. I think Aaron Brooks can be. I like Aaron Brooks.
Yeah,
I
but
think
Teague
he's
is
a nice guy off the bench. He's not anything until someone gets injured, though.
Right.
That's the only issue.
And even in those cases, he's still mostly a scoring point guard, and he'll have give you those 1 or 2 games where he blows up. But the reason that he at sometimes put up some pretty good 3-pointer lines was that he, for some reason, got in Chicago when everybody was dead. I mean, that whole team crumped simultaneously, and so it was the Aaron Brooks show. He took something like 20 shots and had himself a huge ball game. I was fortunate because I think I grabbed him before it. But even if Jeff Teague goes down, this is my warning, I wouldn't expect too much from Brooks other than a DFS league. I think he becomes very interesting in that because being sort of a one-trick pony, you can still have a nice DFS game and not really help someone's actual fantasy team. I think Jeff Teague will actually be, I mean, he's a relatively durable player as well. But yeah, certainly you always want to look at backups in the case somebody getting hurt. What was last year? Teague, I think, played all but 3 or 4 games, right?
Let me look it up right now. Honestly, while I'm pulling up that stat too, I think there's another thing that we got to talk about before we sign off on this podcast, and then we can finish off the show with this topic, because it's the thing that drew the biggest question mark for me on this roster, and it has nothing to do with the players, but it's with the new head coach and Nate McMillan. I mean, the last time we saw him as a head coach was for the Blazers. And the biggest problem with that offense for the Blazers was how predictable it was, and how defenses were able to read it and understand what was happening. Now, last season, we kind of saw that again where, Paul George was the guy with the ball. Everyone knew that, and they started attacking Paul George. Now he has a little bit more help. But does the way that Nate McMillan runs his team, and maybe he's learned more new things, and Jeff Teague played 79 games last year, so you're right, he only missed 3 games. Does the way that Nate McMillan runs his team and how he plays the offense, is that going to affect some of these guys? Maybe like a Jeff Teague, maybe like a Monte Ellis, and most of all, this is where I have my biggest question mark here as well, is maybe a guy like Thaddeus Young isn't good for a team that's offense is going to be like a Nate McMillan offense. Because if you look at that old team, it was a bunch of guard play with Brandon Roy. And I don't know if it's really that good of a fit. And that's why I'm not so high on Thad Young either, because I do see it being where they're going to still try and move Paul George to be that stretch 4, because that's the way the league is moving into.
I think, if there's one thing we can probably say, just in more of a broad stroke effort, Frank Vogel was known more as a defense-first head coach. So I don't know that guy's value is really going to take a hit because of Nate McMillan. I also don't know if it's going to get a boost, but I would be surprised if McMillan causes offensive numbers to decrease. That's my take on McMillan. I mean, there are times where he gets a bit predictable, but again, Frank Vogel was a guy that valued one side of the ball more than the other, and unfortunately for fantasy sake, the side that Frank Vogel valued is the side that doesn't generally translate to massive numbers, and still the guys on the Pacers put up pretty good numbers last year. So I'm not too worried about it. Maybe I should be more worried. We'll find out, but it's not something that I'm thinking about a ton. That registers as like a 2 on my fantasy Richter scale in terms of how much I'm going to adjust guys' values up and down.
And the final thing here is Bleacher Report just put it out that Paul George is the player's choice for comeback player of the year.
Oh, so, congratulations.
I think that was
well-deserved.
Cool.
Yeah, well deserved. And excellent timing. All right, Vince, Thunder Pacers show in the books. Next week, we have an interesting little treat coming up for the listeners, and this will run for a few weeks now as we kind of settle into the true offseason of the NBA. It's a time to meet some of the other folks at Hoop Ball. Vince and I will be alternating. We'll be introducing some of the writers over at hoop-ball.com, a chance for all of you listeners to find out the folks that are going to be bringing you a ton of information this coming year. They all have specialties. I know myself. Obviously, I am more in tune with with roto leagues, with the full season leagues. Vince, sort of an all-around guy, but you brought us in with DFS. Brewski, who was with me here on the podcast to start, he's the guy that handles pretty much everything thrown his way. But now you're going to get to meet some of the niche guys, the guys that have started to make a name for themselves already, brilliant basketball writers, and a chance for the listeners to hear what they sound like, and we'll see if the voice matches the picture. I know with me, everybody's always flabbergasted to find out that I look like a child in real life. And so people can look at some photos over at hoop-ball.com of the writers and then try to figure out if you can guess what they're going to sound like. Vince, how is this all going to shake out? Give us a little preview.
Well, honestly, the first thing I say is I wonder how many men and women say that about their like Match.com accounts. Like, oh, I wonder what they're going to sound like when I meet them. I don't know why I thought of that. That's the first thing that popped in my mind.
We can hashtag that broadcaster problems.
But basically what's going to happen is, like you said, Dan, you and I are going to alternate between hosting here. We're going to bring in one new. So let's say next week, I believe you're going to take on the reins as hosting this first week that starts on Tuesday next. And you're going to hear a voice for those first 2 days, and you're going to hear somebody new and what they brought to the table to Hoop Ball, how they're liking it here, their thoughts on certain teams, their projection on certain players. And then the next week, it's almost the same thing, but with a different voice, a different set of opinions. And you guys are going to get to meet all of these Hoop Ball writers and why they became a huge part of this team and what to expect going into next season from these guys. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, especially with the draft guide that's coming out soon, the B150 that's coming out soon, and the things that we're going to start unveiling when this 2015 or 2016-17 season kicks off. So I'm very excited, and yeah, it's going to be very interesting, and hopefully you guys like all of our voices. Honestly, I haven't got to talk to some of these guys through hearing their voice yet. Wouldn't it be awesome if someone just sounded like Earl, the guy who sounds like Darth Vader? What's his name?
James Earl Jones.
Oh man, if someone had that deep voice, I'd be like,
well, you and I will no longer be working the podcast if somebody comes out of the woodwork and has that voice.
Like, what's up, Mufasa?
Yeah, well, we will happily bow to Darth Mufasa / the neighbor on the Sandlot.
And also the dad from Coming to America.
And Bleeding Gums Murphy, lest we forget that outstanding reference. I'm also
Our movie
excited.
Trivia is awesome.
The James Earl Jones voiceover hour. I'm also excited because this segment, and then we'll wrap this thing up, and thank you to those that are bearing with us here as we talk about the future of the podcasts, is that this is really the beginning of the branch out. Because going into, and Aaron and I talked about it a whole lot back in March and April when this podcast was just getting going. As we move into this next season, 16-17, there are going to be multiple shows. We're going to have DFS shows. We're going to have full season shows. There's going to be a way for everybody that wants to learn about a particular type of fantasy basketball. We're going to have shows that are topical. We're going to have writers that come on and using their expertise that'll be how this becomes a podcast network, and that may be the most exciting part of all for those of us that are broadcast heavy like myself, where this is the growth point. This is the point where everybody can look back to the beginning of August, basically, where podcasts are going to go from one to many, and that's going to be a huge part of the 2016-2017 season. So we're all geeked up about that. But that's the show for today. We'll let everybody off the hook. They don't have to hear us talk about ourselves anymore. He is Vince Miracle. I am Dan Baspris. At VM Center, at Dan Baspris, at Hoopball Tweets. Make sure to follow us. We love interacting with you on the interwebs. And I hope everybody has a fantastic weekend. Oh, before we sign off, Vince, what are all the ways that people can listen going forward?
You can go and subscribe to us on the Cause and Brews channel on iTunes. If you guys do not have an iPhone, you guys want to still download us from iTunes, download the app Double Pod, type in Cause and Brews, subscribe to that channel, and hey, while you're there, do us a huge favor and leave us a rating. And hey, if you guys still don't want to do all that because it's too much work for you, I know you have YouTube on your phone. Just type in Hoopball, look for the logo, subscribe there, start leaving us, and join the conversation by just using #FantasyNBAPod.
Well done, my good man. Vince, I will talk to you next week. Listeners, you will hear us talk to one another. Well, maybe not next week. That's true. Well, we might be. We just might not be talking on air. So you'll hear us talking to some new folks. It'll be interesting, if nothing else. This was Fantasy NBA Today. Have a fantastic weekend, everybody, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Peace.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.